What's up, everybody? I am Bear with BearIndependent.com. We are in the prepper classroom. This is not your typical prepper classroom video, but I needed a whiteboard to reproduce this, which we will go over in great detail here in a moment. This is Divine Numerics and the Coming World War, World War III. Seasons of War for the United States in World War III. This is by Dr. Michael McGee, and this is the book. Got this off of Amazon. It's about $20, about a $20 bill. So we're going to talk about Seasons of War and World War III and the Coming World War. First, let me give you a little bit of backstory. I was somewhere that I had no intention of being, that by a fluke, I happened to be there. Because everything's coincidence, right? There's no hand of God, it's just everything's coincidence. It's completely random. We're just on a ball of rock and water hurtling through space-time and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, it takes more faith to believe that than it does for me to believe in my Creator. And anyway, I was sitting there talking to a table of guys who I'd never met before, and somebody made the comment of, "This is good bread," because we were eating lunch. Small talk, right? I said, "It's good, but it's not as good as my wife's bread." "Oh, tell us about your wife's bread." I said, "Well, it starts with grinding wheat." I said, "Oh, why do you have so much wheat?" Brief note, let's walk. I have more wheat in my office than most people have in their homes. You want some proof of that? That's what a ton of wheat looks like. Got to put it in buckets. It's in my office because I don't have room to put it anywhere else yet, because everything else is full. So we grind the wheat to make the flour to make my wife's homemade bread. It's a honey wheat bread. You'll love it, man. You should try it out. And I go, this guy says, "What are you doing with all that wheat?" I said, "Well, I'm what you would call one of those crazy prepper guys." And instead of sliding farther away, he inched closer and said, "Let's talk." I was like, "Cool, let's talk." And so we got to talking. He said, "Why are you prepping?" Which is another video that we might do next, we might not. And in a nutshell, my big why, my pet peeve, my pet scenario is economic softening and or collapse within the next 12 to 18 months, coupled with civil unrest because of geopolitical reasons, including the American presidential race, November 2020, and those elections, coupled with food shortages and the fact that we have no strategic grain reserves in North America right now because of probably the grand solar minimum and horrendous crop yields recently, which the FDA, not the FDA, the USDA is trying desperately to cover up right now. So food shortage, political civil unrest, and economic softening and or collapse all coming together to create SHTF. And he said, yeah, that sounds about right, and I think we're going to have a war too. And I said, well, explain that to me. And he said, are you familiar with the book of Ecclesiastes? Ecclesiastes 3:8. Now I'm going to read you something. Comes out of this book right here. Those of you who are familiar with the channel are probably saying, that's not your copy of the scriptures, to which I would say, you are correct. This is the first Bible, not the first, but the first Bible after my apostasy, my decade spent at war with the Most High, that I got after that. My first Bible back in the faith. It's King James Version, and I keep it in my office so that I'm never without the Word. Almost never without the Word. I've had to borrow a Bible occasionally. Ecclesiastes 3. To everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones. Stones. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to gain and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Ecclesiastes 3:1-8, King James Version. A time for love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time of peace. This man, Dr. Michael McGee, was hit with a deep conviction to investigate a time for war. And what he did, and he lays out in that book, Divine Numerics in the Coming World War, this timeline, which is copied verbatim. And I have his approval, expressed an implicit approval to air this content here on YouTube. So there's no copyright infringement here. I have it from the mouth of the man, face to face, that I am allowed to do this. In this book, somewhere back here, right here, page 258, is this. This is this. Seasons of War for the United States and World War III. He has figured out mathematically, with a statistical probability of 1 in 300 million of this being chance, with a 90% certainty rate, that this is not random. 1 in 300 million chance. There are 3 cycles, 2 52-year cycles and an 80-year cycle. This is every war that the United States has ever fought. Seasons of war. Let's look at the first season of war. 1760s, French and Indian War, plus 52 to 1812. The War of 1812 and the Barbary Wars. So right here we have 1754 to 1760. Seasons, windows of opportunity for war, okay? Not that year or that date specifically, but a season, a time, a period. 1812. War of 1812 and the Barbary Wars from 1805 to 1815. Civil War, 1860 to 1865. World War I, 1914 to 1918. Vietnam War, 1968, 1961 through 1970, and then over here at 2020. World War III, question mark, 2016 to 2026. We all know what happened in 2016. I think that we could really say, man, in 2008, things were starting to diverge seriously in the United States. 2016, I think it really came to a head. And I do not believe that Donald J. Trump was the intended winner of the 2016 elections, if you catch my drift. Second 52-year cycle. This is offset from the first. And he makes the argument in his book that 52 years is a biblical generation. Now, we know in Leviticus, or I'm sorry, Numbers. Is it Numbers? Numbers or Leviticus. That the Father tells his people, his chosen people, the Israelites, it's Numbers, they reject the promised land. And he says, cool. So you will wander the desert for 40 years so that all you who rejected the promised land can die off, so that your generation can die off. So they wander for 40 years. The argument is made that a generation, therefore, is 40 years. The problem is, and we'll do some simple math, as Dr. Michael McGee points out in his book, the age of responsibility, and we'll get to this in a minute, the age of responsibility is 13. So this is the beginning of a generation. So you'd have 12 years old plus 364 days is prior to the beginning of a generation, plus 40 years is 52 years. That's where he's getting that number from. So over here, this 52-year cycle, which is proven out here, this second 52-year cycle, we have 1846 that falls in between 1812 and 1864, right? That's the Mexican-American War from 1846 to 1848. Then 1898, Spanish-American War. 1950, Korean War, 1950 to 1953. And then 2002, GWOT, Iraq and Trashkanistan, 2002 to ? Ongoing. So we've got Global War on Terror here, 2002, open-ended, okay? So these are the two 52-year cycles. You'll notice the blue stars. We'll get to that in a minute. The 80-year cycle. These are wars that if they were not won, says the author, the United States of America would cease to exist. There would be no U.S., no United States. The 80-year cycle is starting the 1970s, the American Revolutionary War, 1775 through 1783, plus 80 to 1860, the American Civil War, 1860 to 1865. Fast forward 80 years, 1940, World War II, 1939 to 1945. Fast forward 80 years, 2020, World War III, ? And there is a subcycle in here. If you take 1939, the onset of World War II, and add a biblical generation to it, you get 1991, the Gulf War. So this is every war, known war, not clandestine war, but every known declared war. Well, we never declared war on terror. Work with me here. Every war that the United States has ever been in, current or former. The blue stars are convergences. Wherever you see a convergence, this is something where it's absolutely critical that we win. Without it, there is no United States. You see the American Civil War. Had that not gone the way that it went, and depending on what part of the United States you're in, the American Civil War can be referred to as the War of Northern Aggression, and I get it. I understand all purviews and all facets of the geopolitical arguments that are in and around the American Civil War. But suffice it to say, the United States would have ceased to exist. We would not have had the Union if that war had gone a different way, okay? Then over here in 2020, again, we have a convergence, which means this is, again, critical. Whatever's happening in this window of opportunity between 2016 and 2026 is absolutely critical. I don't believe in coincidence. I do believe, after reading this book, which you can get on Amazon, that's where I've got both copies that I got. After reading this book, I think the author does a good job of explaining how he came to these conclusions and the gifts of conviction and knowledge and wisdom and discernment that the Father gave him in writing these. I've met the man. He is not a snake oil salesman. He's not one of these, buy my book and get all the secrets of why you can survive the SHTF blah, 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 and here's how you can mount solar panels on the back of your Tundra, and by the way, the Father has ordained me with critical wisdom that you can have for $39.95 if you sign up for my e-newsletter. He's not that way at all. He's a good, normal man who is an anesthesiologist just trying to live his life that I happen to run into, who wrote this book that's frankly kind of obscure that not a lot of people have heard of, and I think that there's a lot of wisdom and knowledge in here. And so that's why I'm bringing it to you. So I do believe, I've been saying 2020 for a good long while now, before I ever read that book, ever met the author, ever put this on a whiteboard. So I see this as additional confirmation. Furthermore, we know that Vladimir Putin has stated that we are already in World War III. The United States just doesn't know it yet. Go back to 2016. Okay? Now, some things that now we can get conjecture-y. Okay? All this timeline adds up. And so I'm even more concerned than I have been about 2020. To which I would ask you, what are you doing to actually get ready besides watching YouTube videos? What are you actually doing? You must go do the things. Please go do the things. Okay, let's go over here. There is a revision, a new release coming to this book, I have been told. I do not possess it, and I don't know if it's out yet. And frankly, I would buy what's already out right now simply because of this. It's a very good book, especially if you want to go deeper into divine numerics, as he calls it, and seeing the numerical symbolism within your Bible and how the Father speaks to us using numbers. It's a really incredible stuff that's in there. And to his credit, he says repeatedly with some, they're not even prophecies, but some predictions that he makes in the end of the book. He says, look, I could be completely wrong, and only the passage of time will prove that. And if these predictions are wrong or are less than accurate, that still doesn't take away from the rest of the numerical stuff that we've covered in earlier portions of the book. And I find that to be completely honest, and the guy's clearly operating with integrity, and B, he's right. The numerics and the predictions don't necessarily tie into one another, because this all lines up regardless of what happens here. Okay, so if you are a person of faith, I think you'd get a lot out of that book regardless of what your concern is over the coming world war. Okay, now he says this face to face. It's not in this book. It's in the revision that's coming to this book. But he believes that the system, which is the beast, which is the Antichrist, that system is going to run or be dependent upon blockchain technology. Here's where things get interesting. I don't know. I don't know, and I'm not going to pretend to know. I do know that I do own some Bitcoin and Ethereum and a couple of other coins, and I'm probably going to go home and sell them. And I'm probably going to turn that into physical wealth, not like a gold reserve somewhere where they send me paper shares of gold. No, physical wealth that I can lay my hands on. But after talking with him in person, he believes that this is very, very, very critical. This is to the beast and the one world government, blockchain technology. So take that for what it's worth. Lastly, the 6 Trumpets War, which is the book of Revelation. In the book of Revelation in the Bible, he talks about 1/3 of the population being destroyed, which is 2.5 billion plus or minus. You can't get 2.5 billion without, just sheer numbers, without India and China. Now, if we were to make a list of all countries that have nuclear weapons, this would be US, France, China, Russia, India, North Korea, question mark, Israel, question mark. I think I'm forgetting one or two, but it's a pretty dang short list. And 2 of these, China and India, are over here required, have to have these guys in order to, just because of sheer numbers, to get to 2.5 billion dead in the 6 Trumpets War in the book of Revelation. That sucks. And one of the things that came to me is 1/3 of all humanity dead is we don't get to pick which third. I was actually in the car recently with two brothers talking about this. I said, that's one of us in this car. That's 1/3 of my household. That could be grandma and my youngest child, which is unacceptable to me. And so this brief aside, one of the reasons that I get really standoffish with people who are looking forward to SHTF, because it means you're ignorant and ill-informed or malicious. No, thank you. I'm not interested. Well, it's all about the leveling, man. It's like, we're going to mark your position on a map and tell everybody I know that you are a POS, and we're going to stay away from you until such a time it makes sense to not stay away from you. Roger, Roger. So, yet again, and I'm not saying this 2020 convergence is the Six Trumpets War. I'm just saying it's very interesting. If it was, man, my indicators there would be to watch for anything to have to do with China and India. India is 1-point-something billion. China is 2 billion. We know geopolitically there's a whole hell of a lot going on in the world right now, especially in China, right? The world is only 3 missed meals away from chaos. US, France, China, Russia, India, North Korea, Israel. Gosh, I know I'm missing at least one. Can't remember. It'll be all right. But all the more, yet another compelling reason to get your stuff squared away. It's coming. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that at 2020, the world falls into chaos. But we have this window here, 2016 to 2026. Even if that's not World War III, per se. Even if that's not the Six Trumpets War in the book of Revelation in the Holy Bible. There's something, mathematically, statistically, with a 1 in 300 million chance of being random, meaning that it's coming. There's something coming in this window of time, 2016 to 2026, that is going to be an active war for the United States. Use that knowledge to the best of your ability to gain an advantage on the situation. I wanted to bring this to you because I just find it fascinating and compelling, and it's one more piece of confirmation for me. It fits into the whole of puzzle pieces that I am trying to put together to match my convictions that are really inexplicable because they're led by the Spirit with what I see, touch, feel, taste, hear in my daily physical walk. To put all these things together to make sense of the four-dimensional space-time battlefield that we exist in right now. How is all this going to come together and what can we do about it? And so this is one more indicator that things are going to get potentially crazy in that period of time. How crazy? Looks like on the level of American Civil War crazy. That's what it looks like. And so basic preparedness covers the vast majority of issues. Food, water, friends, weapons, self-reliance. I'm getting chills running down my spine right now. Maybe this is the video that you needed to hear. Maybe you've been on the fence the whole time, this whole time, or maybe you've just been half-assing it, just box checking it, paying it lip service. Maybe this is the one that gets you going, makes you sit up and pay attention and actually start doing the things. Divine Numerics and the Coming World War by Dr. Michael McGee. It's available on Amazon. I make no money by telling you that. I enjoyed meeting the man. I intend to meet with him again in the future. And I believe that you will get something out of that book, regardless of who you are. If you want to be here, click the subscribe button, ring the little bell, leave me a comment down below, let me know what you thought about this. Thank you to all of our patrons for keeping the ball rolling. We would not be here without y'all. Shalom.